What's up, y'all? Welcome to G-Easy Fades. We are doing a burst fade today. That's right. So starting out, he has a lot of hair. I'm going to wet it down and section from the center of the head all the way into his front corner, into his recession point. And I'll just start to comb the hair how it lays here. And then my first parting is gonna be on the side of his head, right at his parietal ridge, where the head starts to round out from the side of the head to the top. And I'll just take a strip there and then cut it with my fingers pretty much flush to the head. And that's going to be my top guideline for where my fade stops when I start my fading process. Make sure when you cut the hair here, you have completely even saturation throughout all the hair. Hair can stretch up to 25%, I believe, when it is wet. And so you want to make sure you're mindful of that. And then same thing on this side, nice clean partings. As you can see, I have the hair combed slightly forward because my client is going to be styling his hair forward with a little bit more of a textured look. And so when I comb the hair slightly forward, then I make sure I preserve a little bit more length for styling. If I were to comb it straight down from the top of the head, then I would cut it too short towards the middle, which sucks. So I'm not going to do that. Next, towards the back of the head, I'm keeping my fingers flush. I am making sure I keep it a little bit more rounded. I'm always okay with going back and detailing later on when I do my fading. Next, I start my profile section. The profile section is basically just a mohawk strip establishing your length for the top and back throughout this whole haircut. The top and back are going to be pretty similar lengths, seeing that we are doing a burst fade. Then once I've established that, I'm going to go ahead and start with horizontal sections, taking it up about an inch every time and just clearing out all that length there. I love using profile sectioning so much just because you can always, at pretty much any side of the head, just take your shears, project the hair, see right where your guide is with that profile sectioning, and just cut all the hair that's sticking out beyond that point. You'll get really clean, really precise results. And one thing to note is that the wider your partings are, then the choppier it will look. So if you want to go for a more textured look, a little bit more of a choppy look, then make those sections wider. If you want everything to be super precise and flow together really nicely, then make sure all those sections are close together, like a half to a quarter inch apart, because that's going to help a lot. Now I'm cross-checking here, and I am really just taking out these diagonal partings and just seeing if there's any irregularity in length, just because seeing that my partings were in between half an inch and an inch apart, I want to make sure that I'm cross-checking, looking at it from different angles, and making sure I'm achieving a really clean, consistent result throughout. And then for the top, nice and easy. As you can see at the tip of my fingers, you see my guideline there that I started in the back. And then I'll just go ahead, take my next section and just continue that length to the front. I usually don't like to cut too far past the second knuckle, just because when you are scissor cutting, you can very easily have inconsistent tension because of the bone structure in your fingers actually. And so not cutting past that second knuckle gives you a really precise result, which I love. Same thing on the top here, going in, horizontal sectioning, making sure I'm mindful in the front. He has a little bit of a higher hairline towards his corners. And so I'm making sure I'm keeping it really square. I'm okay with rounding it a little bit more towards the back, just in order for me to connect it with the sides. But towards the front, I know he's brushing it forward, and so I don't want to give him like a rounded out hairline. I want to make sure it's nice and full throughout the whole thing. Now just cutting my last piece. And my next step here, after I brush the hair forward, is just to kind of connect those front corners that I didn't previously cut in with the sectioning here. As you can see, I pull the hair out, project to the point where the hair on the front starts to fall out, and then anything beyond that point I'll take out. Next up, we're getting into this fade. We are slapping on that 3-guard, lever open. We're gonna have a really easy time blending into our shear work on top. Since it's already pre-cut, we cut it to finger length around the parietal ridge. And so all we have to do is just open that lever, take it pretty much straight open, and it should flow together pretty nicely for the most part. Might involve some detailing later on, just getting that last little bit of weight on the sides taken out. But this is going to create some really solid shape because of the foundation that was already established from my shear work. Here you can see on this side, it's laying a little bit heavier, but I'm still flicking out, keeping my work with my number 3-guard very consistent. I want to start and just gently flick out as I get toward the top, not going too high. I'm remembering that I'm just debulking the sides. I'm not trying to blend anything out super perfectly in terms of my shear cutting on the sides. I just want to start to lay a canvas for my skin fade and create a space for me to start putting in guidelines very precisely. Debulking is so important because a lot of times if you try to use the trimmer on, say, a 1/2 inch of hair, you go ahead, you start putting it in, and there is so much overhang when you start to follow it up with your lever open or your 1-guard closed. You create so much more work for yourself. And so I recommend, if you don't fade down, at least debulk. Next up, I am using my 1.5 guard open, and I'm continuing to just clear out space underneath the 3-guard open. My 1.5 guard open is essentially a 2 or pretty close to it. What I like about this 1.5 guard is that it's a little bit rounded on the bottom, and so it makes flicking out a little bit easier, and so it really helps to make your transition really fluid. As you can see on this side, it's a lot easier to kind of get a vision for what your second guard after you debulk should do in terms of just lightening up the fade a little bit more and establishing that initial gradients. One thing that I like to do just to save time is once I've gone in with the 3-guard, I find that I can blend out just by using my 1.5 and just flicking out from there. Now this is a technique you can start to incorporate in your fading just to save you some time. I find that a lot of the times we're so measured in our guidelines when we put the trimmer line in first, and then we have to make sure we go up a certain distance above that point with the lever open. Instead of doing that, I can just go in with my lever open and then just follow up with the trimmer underneath that point, stopping wherever I want. And that way I can create the exact desired thickness to my lever open guideline in so much less time. And then I'll go and follow up with the clipper closed, and then just go up one notch at a time, watching the line shift up and just gradually erasing it in baby steps as I open up the lever. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get started with my one guard, creating another 1/2 inch guideline, starting to soften up the transition in between the 1.5 open and the lever open guideline beneath that point. I definitely recommend for y'all to not fully close your lever when you're putting in your initial guideline with your guards, just so that you don't cut out extra work for yourself. The only part of my fade that I really like to get really precise with my lever with is going to be when I'm erasing the bottom guideline in between the trimmer and the half guard, and when I'm using my half guard itself to blend out the line in between the 1 and 0.5. And that's just because I find that the hair above that point is going to be a lot more forgiving. It's going to be a lot darker, and you don't need to be quite as measured. You're kind of flicking out on that portion of the head anyway, and so going all the way closed with your lever is only going to cause you more problems when it comes to erasing that portion of the fade. Now, one area you guys might have difficulty on this particular hair type is it is very fine and it is very light. With hair that's kind of medium blonde like this, it can be a lot more difficult to actually create any sort of appearance that there's a blend, because if you go too close with your guards on the side of the head, yes, it'll be a really clean fade, but it'll also look like it's mostly just skin with maybe a little bit of stubble above it. And so I definitely recommend that if you're fading this type of hair, keep your guidelines a little bit lower, because that way if the blend starts coming out exactly how you wanted it, then great. If it starts to appear a little bit too heavy, then you can always start to raise it up from that point. The picture that he showed me as a reference photo was admittedly a little bit of a higher fade, but the reference photo was also someone with hair that was a lot darker. And so you could definitely see the fade on the sides. And so if I want to achieve that same look, then I have to leave it a lot heavier, or if I want to still give him a nice stretched out fade, I can just make it a little bit lower and blend out. And as I fade it out, as I start to see what areas stay dark and what areas are naturally lighter, then I can adjust from that point. It's always better to be safe than sorry. Now, as you can see on this side of the head, I'm going in with my half guard, just kind of using my lever, using my corners, starting to float the blade out more as I get toward the middle portion of the fade, because I don't want to take anything too high. I don't want to dig in with my corners and cause a gash. I want to make sure I maintain some dimension within this fade And that involves me using my corners a little bit more, keeping it a little bit fuller on the sides, and just kind of cornering out guidelines a little bit more than scooping them out, just so I can still see that contrast. Here I will go ahead with the 1.5 guard and just take it straight up just to remove a little bit of that weight. Next up, with our lineup, just something very light touches with my trimmer on the back. I push in with my trimmers in any area where the hair grows upward or to the side. It's important to remember to push into that area more than try to scrape down on it, because it's always a lot easier, especially in an area like this, to try to just go straight in with your trimmers, try to set a line in, and end up bringing it too high because of all of the hair growth patterns that are below that point that push the hair upwards. And so before I do my lineup, I just want to make sure everything's even, so I do a little bit of detailing with my trimmer over comb, just using diagonal sectioning here, just to make sure everything is laying as it should. Then nice light taps with the trimmer, and I'm creating a little bit more of a V shape. As I line up this back portion, I want to be mindful of the fact that there is a lot of bulk, a lot of fullness right on top of that line. And so I want to make sure I am not only getting the overhanging hairs, but I'm also going back with my trimmer and kind of pushing into the line underneath, just so I can take everything out underneath it and create a clean line. Then just something light, just something easy, some shear over comb. What you know about shear over comb? Not much? Well, let me tell you about it. I am starting at the top portion of my fade where the 3 ends. I am taking the hair, projecting it outward with my comb. I am not ever digging my comb into the scalp, because my goal with shear over comb is to build some graduation, build a little bit of weight, and make everything flow together a lot more naturally. Remember that when you are using shear over comb, the higher you project the hair, or the steeper the angle, the softer it will lay. So if you project it to 90 degrees from the head, it's going to create a more blended, even look. If you angle it beyond that point, it's going to remove even more weight and round it out a little bit more. Finally, we are going back in with our shears. My client wanted a little bit more off the top, and so we are going back and just dry cutting here. I prefer to dry cut. With dry cutting, you're definitely going to get a lot more responsiveness in terms of how you can see the hair laying right after you cut it. That's one of the reasons I like to dry cut. If you are doing just a trim, or you're going through the final stages of the haircut, then just going through, and especially if you're going for a textured look, doing some texturizing will do wonders for making sure you just have that little bit of extra refinement that can be the difference in between a normal haircut and a fantastic haircut. Yeah, try it out. Let me know what you think. Here I dropped my shears. Oh my gosh. But I picked them up. They did not break. Very fortunately, they did not end up breaking. And so we are getting back into this, just finishing out my horizontal portions on the back, and then I'm going to go ahead, and since we took a little bit extra length off the top, I'm going to go ahead and just make sure that everything connects towards the back. I want to make sure my layering is consistent and it's not too heavy, not too full on the back. I'm going to go ahead and project out 90 degrees just to connect the top of the back. The length that we chose for the top is perfect. It's nice and full. As you can see, that squared shape towards the front definitely did him good because it's not too high in his recession points. And it's going to be something that he can style if he wants to, or he can just leave it alone. Now we are finishing off with Tomb 45. Tomb 45, that's right. The Tomb 45 pure powder. We're talking about that dust. As you can see here, coming in before looking like 2010's Justin Bieber, but now he is looking right. You see the fade on the sides, nice and clean. The texture in the top and the back is perfect. If you guys thought this was helpful, go ahead, subscribe, hit that bell, leave a comment. Let me know what you guys want to see next. I'll see you next time. Peace.